Chapter 17. As Ahmed approached, Sari and I shrank back to the center of the chamber. Run, I thought. We can run away from him. My eyes searched frantically for a place we could escape through. But there was no way out. The tunnel in the corner appeared to be the only opening, and we'd have to run right past Ahmed to get to it. Sari, I saw, was frantically pressing the beeper at her waist. She glanced at me, her features tight with fear. "Yow!" I cried as I suddenly fell back into someone. I turned and stared into the bandaged face of Mummy. With a loud gasp, I lurched away from it. "Let's make a run for the tunnel," I whispered. "Sari," my throat so dry and tight I could barely make myself heard. "He can't get both of us." Sari stared back at me, confused. I don't know if she heard me or not. "There is no escape," Ahmed said softly, as if reading my thoughts. "There is no escape from Kala's curse." He's going to kill us," Sari screamed. "You have violated her sacred chamber," Ahmed said, raising the torch high, holding the dagger at his waist. He stepped nearer. "I saw you yesterday climb into the sacred sarcophagus. I saw you two playing in Kala's holy chamber. It was then that I knew I had to carry out my sacred duties. Sari and I both cried out as something dropped from the chamber ceiling. All three of us looked up to see a rope ladder dangling from the hole I had fallen through. It swung back and forth as it was lowered nearly to the floor. "Are you down there?" "I'm coming down," Uncle Ben shouted down to us. "Uncle Ben, no!" I screamed, but he was already moving down the ladder, making his way quickly, the ladder steadying under his weight. Halfway down he stopped and peered into the chamber. "What on earth?" he cried, his eyes roaming over the amazing scene. And then he saw Ahmed. "Ahmed, what are you doing here?" Uncle Ben cried in surprise. He quickly lowered himself to the floor, jumping down the last 3 rungs. "Merely carrying out Kala's wishes," Ahmed said, his face expressionless now, his eyes narrowed in anticipation. "Kala? The priestess?" Uncle Ben wrinkled his features in confusion. "He's going to kill us," Sari cried, rushing up to her dad, throwing her arms around his waist. "Daddy, he's going to kill us, and then turn us into mummies!" Uncle Ben held Sari and looked over her shoulder, accusingly at Ahmed. "Is this true?" "The chamber has been violated. It has fallen to me, Doctor, to carry out the curse." Uncle Ben put his hand on Sari's trembling shoulders and gently moved her aside. Then he began to make his way slowly, steadily toward Ahmed. "Ahmed, let us get out of here and discuss this," he said, raising his right hand as if offering it in friendship. Ahmed took a step back, raising the torch menacingly. The priestess's will must not be ignored." "Ahmed, you are a scientist, and so am I," Uncle Ben said. I couldn't believe how calm he sounded. I wondered if it was an act. The scene was tense. We were in such terrifying danger. But I felt a little bit calmer knowing that my uncle was here, knowing that he'd be able to handle Ahmed and get us out of here. Alive. I glanced reassuringly at Sari, who was staring hard, biting her lower lip in the tense concentration, as her father approached Ahmed. "Ahmed, put down the torch," Uncle Ben urged, his hand extended. "The dagger, too. Please, let's discuss this as scientists." "What is there to discuss?" Ahmed asked softly, his eyes studying Uncle Ben intently. "The will of Kala must be carried out, as it has been for 4,000 years. That cannot be discussed." "As scientist to scientist," Uncle Ben repeated, returning Ahmed's stare as if challenging him. "The curse is ancient. Kala has had her way for many centuries. Perhaps it is time to let it rest." "Lower your weapons, Ahmed. Let us talk about this, scientist to scientist." "It's going to be okay," I thought, breathing a long sigh of relief. "It's all going to be okay. We're going to get out of here." But then Ahmed moved with startling quickness. Without warning, without a word, he pulled back his arms and gripped the torch handle with both hands, swung it as hard as he could at Uncle Ben's head. The torch made a loud thunk as it connected with the side of Uncle Ben's face. The orange flames danced up, a swirl of bright color, and then shadows. Uncle Ben groaned. His eyes bulged wide with surprise, with pain. The torch hadn't set him aflame, but the blow knocked him out. He slumped to his knees. Then his eyes closed, and he dropped limply to the floor. Ahmed raised the torch high, his eyes gleaming with excitement, with triumph, and I knew we were doomed. Chapter 18. "Daddy!" Sari rushed to her father and knelt at his side, but Ahmed moved quickly, thrusting the torch toward her, holding the dagger ready, forcing her to back away. A thin trickle of blood, glowing darkly in the light of the fire, rolled down the side of Uncle Ben's face. He groaned, but didn't stir. I glanced quickly at the mummies, scattered around the room. It was hard to believe that we would soon be one of them. I thought of leaping at Ahmed, trying to knock him over. I imagined grabbing the torch, swinging at him, forcing him against the wall, forcing him to let us escape. But the blade of the dagger glowed, as if warning me to stay back. I'm just a kid, I thought. Thinking I could beat a grown man with a knife and a torch was just crazy. Crazy! The whole scene was crazy and terrifying. I suddenly felt sick. My stomach tightened and a wave of nausea swept over me. "Let us go! Now!" Sari screamed at Ahmed. To my surprise, he reacted by swinging back the torch and heaving it across the room. It landed with a soft plop in the center of the tar pit. Instantly, the surface of the tar burst into flames. The flames spread, leaping up toward the chamber ceiling until the entire square was aflame. As I stared in amazement, the tar popped and bubbled beneath the orange and red covering of flames. "We must wait for it to boil," Ahmed said calmly, the shadows cast by the flames flickering across his face and clothing. The chamber grew thick with smoke. Sari and I both started to cough. Ahmed bent down to put his hand under Uncle Ben's shoulders. He began to drag him across the floor. "Leave him alone!" Sari screamed, running frantically toward Ahmed. I saw that she was going to try to fight him. I grabbed her shoulders and held her back. We were no match for Ahmed. He had already knocked Uncle Ben unconscious. There was no telling what he would do to us. Holding on to Sari, I stared at him. What did he plan to do now? It didn't take long to find out. With surprising strength, he pulled Uncle Ben across the floor to one of the open mummy cases against the wall. Then he hoisted him over the side and shoved him into the case. Not even the slightest bit out of breath. Ahmed slid the lid closed over my unconscious uncle. Then he turned to us. "You too, and that one!" He pointed to an enormous mummy case on a tall pedestal next to Uncle Ben's. It was nearly as tall as I was, and at least 10 feet long. It must have been built to hold a mummified person, and all of his or her possessions. "Let us go," Sari insisted. "Let us out of here. We won't tell anyone what happened. Really?" "Please climb into the case," Ahmed insisted patiently. "We must wait for the tar to be ready." "We're not going in there," I said. I was shaking all over. I could feel the blood pulsing at my temples. I didn't even realize I was saying what I was saying. I was so scared, I didn't even hear myself. I glanced at Sari. She stood defiantly, with her arms crossed tightly over her chest. But despite her brave pose, I could see her chin trembling and her eyes beginning to tear. "Into the coffin," Ahmed repeated, "to await your fate. Kala will not be kept waiting. The ancient curse will be carried out in her name." "No!" I cried angrily. I stood on tiptoe and peered into the enormous mummy case. It smelled so sour in there, I nearly hurled. The case was made of wood. It was warped and stained and peeling inside. In the flickering light, I was sure I saw dozens of insects crawling around in there. "Get into the case, now!" Ahmed demanded. Chapter 19. Sari climbed up over the side and lowered herself into the ancient mummy case. She always had to be first at everything, but this was one time I didn't mind. I hesitated, resting my hand on the rotting wood on the side of the case. I glanced at the case next to it, the case with Uncle Ben inside. It was carved of stone, and the heavy stone lid was closed, sealing it up tight. Did Uncle Ben have any air in there? I wondered, gripped with fear. Was he able to breathe? And then I thought glumly, what difference does it make? All 3 of us are going to be dead soon. All 3 of us are going to be mummies, locked away in this hidden chamber forever. "Get in! Now!" Ahmed ordered, his dark eyes burning into mine. I'm just a kid," I cried. I don't know where the words came from. I was so scared I really didn't know what I was saying. An unpleasant sneer formed on Ahmed's face. "Many of the pharaohs were your age at death," he said. I wanted to keep him talking. I had the desperate idea that if I could keep the conversation going, I could get out of this mess. But I couldn't think of anything to say. My brain just froze. "Get in," Ahmed ordered, moving toward me, menacingly. Feeling totally defeated, I slid one leg over the side of the rotting coffin, raised myself up, and then dropped myself down beside Sari. She had her head bowed and her eyes shut tight. I think she was praying. She didn't glance up, even when I touched her shoulder. The coffin lid began to slide over us. The last thing I saw were the red flames leaping up over the pit of tar. Then the lid closed us into complete blackness. "Gabe?" Siri whispered a few seconds after the lid was closed. I'm frightened. For some reason, her confession made me snicker. She said it with such surprise, as if being frightened was a startling new experience. I'm too frightened to be frightened, I whispered back. She grabbed my hand and squeezed it. Her hand was even colder and clammier than mine. He's crazy, she whispered. Yeah, I know, I replied, still holding on to her hand. I think there are bugs in here, she said with a shudder. I can feel them crawling on me. Me too, I told her. I realized I was gritting my teeth. I always do that when I'm nervous, and now I was more nervous than I thought was even humanly possible. Poor Daddy, Siri said. The air in the coffin was already beginning to feel stuffy and hot. I tried to ignore the disgusting sour smell, but it had crept into my nostrils, and I could even taste it. I held my breath to keep from gagging. We're going to suffocate in here, I said glumly. He's going to kill us before we can suffocate, Siri wailed. Ow! I could hear her slap at a bug on her arm. Maybe something will happen, I told her. Pretty lame, but I couldn't think of what else to say. I couldn't think, period. All I keep thinking about is how he's going to reach in and pull my brain out through my nose, Siri wailed. Why did you have to tell me that, Gabe? It took me a while to reply. Then all I could say was, sorry. I began to picture the same thing, and another wave of nausea swept over me. We can't just sit here, I said. We have to escape. I tried to ignore the thick, sour smell. Huh? How? Let's try to push up the lid, I said. Maybe if we both push together. I counted to 3 in a low whisper, and we both flattened our hands against the coffin top and pushed up as hard as we could. No, the lid wouldn't budge. Maybe it's locked, Maybe he's locked it or put something heavy on top of it, Siri suggested with a miserable sigh. Maybe, I replied, feeling just as miserable. We sat in silence for a while. I could hear Siri's breathing. She was sort of sobbing as she breathed. I realized my heart was racing. I could feel my temples throbbing. I pictured the long hook that Ahmed would use to pull our brains out of our heads. I tried to force that thought out of my mind, but it wouldn't go away. I remembered being a mummy 2 Halloweens ago and how the costume unraveled in front of my friends. Little did I know that I'd soon have a mummy costume that would never unravel. Time passed. I don't know how long. I realized I had been sitting with my legs crossed. Now they were beginning to fall asleep. I uncrossed them and stretched them out. The mummy case was so big, Siri and I could both lie down if we wanted to. But we were too tense and terrified to lie down. I was the first to hear the scrabbling sound, like something climbing quickly around inside the mummy case. At first I thought it was Siri, but she grabbed my hand with her icy hand, and I realized she hadn't moved from in front of me. We both listened hard. Something near us, something right next to us, bumped the side of the case. A mummy? Was there a mummy in the case with us? Moving? I heard a soft groan. Siri squeezed my hands so tightly it hurt, and I uttered a sharp cry. Another sound. Closer. Gabe? Siri whispered, her voice tiny and shrill. Gabe! There's something in here with us!